Welcome back to Celebrating Culture. I'm here today with Sister Renee Kittelson, who is part of the Sisters of Cabrini, which are actually titled the MSC. And Sister, what does that stand for?
The Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Now, how does MSC get that whole title?
Well, it's in Latin. It's the Latin
It's
initials.
the Latin version.
Yes.
Cabrini, Mother Cabrini, is just a phenomenal woman in what she did in her lifetime.
Yes.
So she starts off in around 1850, she's born.
Yes.
And I understand 2 months premature.
Right.
So her health is challenged.
Yes.
Becomes a sister by 1880.
Well, it was interesting. Cabrini tried to enter a couple orders, but nobody would accept her because of her poor health. So one of her local priests said, Cabrini, why don't you start a missionary order of women? Because there was no such thing in the church. It was all men who were doing the missionary work. So she did. She founded our order.
Now, when did she come to America?
Well, she founded the order in 1880, and by 7 years later, she went to Pope Leo XIII, and she said, we are ready to go to China, because that was her dream, was to go to China. And he said, no, Cabrini, not to the east, but to the west. So he said, I want you to go to America and to work with all the Italians who are immigrating there. So it took her a couple years to get all the sisters together, and 2 years after that would be in 1889, she had it all arranged, and she arrived in New York City. Did not get a very good welcome there. As a matter of fact, the priest who greeted her said, we really don't need you. You can go back to Italy. She said, well, I have a letter from the Pope. And I'm staying, and this is difficult to believe, but in 3 months she opened an orphanage in a school in New York City. And then she just kept going back and forth between Europe and the Americas. She had houses in several other places throughout Europe, and then down to South America. But what people would like to know is, why did she come to New Orleans?
Yes, absolutely.
So what happened was there were, I think, 8 Italian gentlemen who were accused of something, and they went to trial and they were exonerated, but when they walked out the door, they were lynched.
Yes.
So you can see how the Italians were not well accepted here in New Orleans. So Cabrini was very upset about this, and so she came down here, and when she came and visited with the bishop, she realized there were so many orphans because of the yellow fever.
Yes.
And so the bishop said, oh, Cabrini, please stay, please found a house here. And so she did.
And then so this is 1892. About
Yes.
a year after the lynching,
Yes.
she comes into New Orleans, in the French Quarter, which was called Little Palermo at
Right.
the time. She sets up shop and starts taking the orphans from the yellow fever, working. And what else does she offer the Sicilian immigrants?
Well, she also offered them classes in becoming citizens, in English, and sewing, and parenting. So those classes were also offered to the Italian immigrants.
And that goes on for about a decade, and then it's doing so well. Amazing businesswoman.
Yes, she was.
She actually got somebody to fund building this building?
Well, what happened was she invited Salvatore Pizzati. He was a sea captain here in New Orleans, but of course of Italian origin. And she said, oh, you must come and see my wonderful orphanage. And she knew that it was overflowing. And when the captain went and saw that there were like 3 children and 1 bed, and they were really, the place was really too small for what she was trying to do, he nearly cried, and he said, oh, Cabrini, you find the property, you buy the property, and I will build the building for a new orphanage. So Cabrini came here. She was awesome in finding property. Oh my goodness, her real estate, the Holy Spirit really inspired her when it came to real estate. So she bought this fabulous property right here on St. John's Bayou. And so then the captain said, well, this is perfect. Now I will give you so much money to build an orphanage. And she said, oh no, that won't be enough. So he gave her $75,000.
What year was that?
This was about 1905.
$75,000 in 1905.
Big bucks.
Very big bucks.
So he built this building, and for 54 years it was an orphanage.
How many children, perhaps a year, were here?
Well, we know there were at least 140.
Wow.
140 young girls.
She
Yes.
had perhaps over 100 young girls a year.
Yes.
And then by 1959, it becomes a school.
Yes, 1959 it was decided that the orphanage was no longer needed here in New Orleans, and so it was turned into a high school.
Now, through that period, Mother Cabrini, how many trips did she make back and forth to
She
here?
crossed the Atlantic 24 times. That does not count all her trips to Central and South America.
And how many facilities did she open?
Well, when she was 67 years old, she was in Chicago, and she died. She died in Chicago, and at age 67, she had started 67 schools, hospitals, and orphanages all around the world.
Now, and you keep here. There's also her bedroom is still, it's protected here.
Yes, we have the room where she stayed. She came to New Orleans 3 times. So the 2 of those times, this building would have been, so she stayed in that room.
And then she became a saint.
Yes, yes. Cabrini became a U.S. citizen in 1909 in my hometown of Seattle. And so when she died, she was canonized very quickly. She was beatified in 1938, and she was canonized in 1946 to become the first U.S. citizen to be a canonized saint.
And to do that, what do you need to become canonized?
Well, she needed 2 miracles for beatification and 2 miracles for canonization.
And it happened very quickly.
Well, they were interesting miracles. The first one, 4 years after she died, a little baby was born in Columbus Hospital, one of our hospitals in New York, and the nurse put the wrong dose of silver nitrate in the baby's eyes and blinded him. Some went down his throat, and he developed pneumonia. So the sisters prayed frantically and put relics on the child of Cabrini. And the next day, his vision was restored. 2 days later, his pneumonia was cleared up, and he was healed. But both he and his brother grew up to be priests, and he was strongly associated with us, Father Peter Smith. And then the other miracle occurred in Seattle. One of our sisters, Sister Delphina, was dying. She was young, but she was dying of some gastric problem. And Mother Cabrini appeared to her, and she said, I've got work for you to do. 3 nights in a row, Cabrini appeared to Sister Delphina. Now, Cabrini was already dead, remember? And so Sister Delphina got up, went back to work at our hospital in Seattle for only 46 more years.
Now I understand Mother Cabrini had a phrase, a saying.
I can do all things in him who strengthens me.
And she obviously can strengthen other people.
Yes, yes.
And recently, was there a child that
Yes, recently we have a national shrine is in Chicago where she died, and there was a family who their little girl was very sick, and they called their director, Sister Bridget, and said, we just feel that if we could just put our little girl on Mother Cabrini's bed in Chicago, that she would be healed. And that's exactly what happened. Before they could bring her back to California, she was eating well because she had a failure to thrive, and she had Lyme disease, and when they had tested her blood, there was no Lyme disease in her blood. So her miracles continue. Yes.
And here in New Orleans on Esplanade, there's a grotto for Mother Cabrini. So you can see it if you're a visitor here.
Right, yes. Anybody can walk in it. It's open all the time.
It's open all the time. And obviously there's this museum in here, this exhibit room, shows the timeline of her life. And I mean, as far as missionary work, she has to be one of the most successful missionaries of the church.
Yes, her name was Frances, but when she became a missionary, she took the name of Xavier because Frances Xavier was such a great missionary, and that was her goal, to be a missionary.
And her first place was on St. Philip Street
Yes,
in New Orleans, so that was there, and then that was really the heart of Little Palermo.
yes,
And then from there, she helped the Italians, and then went on, took care of things for a while, got everything settled, and went to her next location, so to speak.
yes. And after this school was opened, we outgrew the school too, so we had to open the Moss Street part of Cabrini High School in 1965. So we currently have about 400 students.
Okay. Sister, if people want to find out, they can go to CabriniHigh.com?
Yes,
or?
yes. Just call Cabrini and they'll give you my phone number because I'm the tour guide.
Okay. Sister, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you. Welcome to New Orleans.
Oh,
We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more of Celebrating Culture.